as we did in 2 previous days, today also I will present our second speaker, our second presenter, Jelena Vasiljević, a dear colleague of ours. And then after her presentation, we will have a discussion for both of our speakers. So Jelena Vasiljević is a research associate at the Institute for Philosophy and Social Theory, University of Belgrade. She's also currently a visiting fellow at the Center for Southeast European Studies at the University of Graz. Previously, she was a research fellow at the University of Edinburgh School of Law, where she collaborated on a CITSI project, which explored the transformation of citizenship regimes in the post-Yugoslav states. And as you can imagine, Jelena Vasiljević was a crucial person for the Serbian case. Her background is in socio-cultural anthropology, and her research fields include citizenship studies, legal anthropology, culture of memory. Her book, Anthropology of Citizenship, is forthcoming this month. Her presentation is named How do we need to think about solidarity and citizenship? Jelena, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jana. Thank you all for coming. Well, let me first tell you that the subject of my talk does not address the social justice in an immediate way, but however it does explore the notion of solidarity, and solidarity is almost unavoidable when thinking about social justice. Now this talk will bring some of my recent reflections on solidarity and citizenship, where citizenship has been in my research focus for quite some time now, while solidarity is a new subject for me, and in a way it's both a great and a bit intimidating opportunity to talk about solidarity after such a distinguished speaker who wrote an important and great book of solidarity, which Adriana mentioned. And I have to add that not many books have been written about the topic of solidarity. So I just want to say that many of our contemporary imaginations of a more just society include the need for more solidarity. But I also think that we cannot think about any present or future potential political communities and orderings of communities without the notion of citizenship as a principal political and legal organization of community. So it came to me almost as a necessity to explore their relationship, especially as citizenship, as I will show in my presentation, in its various forms invokes solidarity, while solidarity remains somewhat ambiguous towards citizenship, given its simultaneous reproduction of inclusionary and exclusionary mechanisms. So exploring the tensions between citizenship and solidarity is something that propelled me to write these initial thoughts. So let me begin now. Solidarity is on everyone's lips these days, whether the news is about collapsed national economies, natural catastrophes, or the emergent refugee crisis. All around the world we hear pleas for solidarity with an ever-growing number of people who have lost their jobs, their homes, their safety, and their loved ones. Media and social networks are flooded with stories of so-called ordinary citizens providing shelter and food to those in need. Stories that speak as much about human compassion as they do about the failure of state and international institutions. Moreover, these acts of solidarity, depicted in such a way as to counter the effects of mainstream policies, are sometimes presented as models for the potential and allegedly better socio-economic arrangements we should be striving for, in other words, as politically instructive. For instance, you may recall various articles on citizen-run health clinics, food centers, legal aid, etc., that were flourishing in Greece, both during the economic and now the refugee crisis. So the subject I want to address here is a very broad one, and I will only touch it fragmentally, mostly as an appeal for some further rethinking. Namely, the question I want to explore generally is how can we think about solidarity as a politically operational concept? What does it mean to base a political community on the principles of solidarity? And can acts of solidarity be used not only to help and support others, but with the aim to change power relations and constitute new political orders as well? In other words, can solidarity be political? And if so, is it justifiable to claim solidarity for progressive, emancipatory political projects only, or can it equally be part of a conservative agenda? Now, the idea of relating solidarity to political community is hardly a new one, as many political theories rely on specific visions of solidarity as the cohesive force that turns individuals into members of society. However, there have been very few attempts, especially in more recent political and social theories, to discuss solidarity from a theoretical point of view and to provide a coherent framework that explains the role of solidarity in constituting the fiber of a political community. Moreover, social theory interpretations of solidarity have predominantly viewed it as a given feature of every group or as the essence of cooperative behavior. For instance, both mechanical and organic solidarity are assumed in Durkheim's famous account, emerging from the particular character of individuals and groups. It is usually also presumed that solidarity takes place between actors who are alike, or as in rational choice theory, who strive to achieve the same goal. In other words, these accounts do not treat solidarity as created, agitated for, and as transformative, in other words, as capable of challenging and establishing political and social orders. The context mentioned at the beginning, the context of the crisis, refugee crisis and economic crisis, which have brought the topic of solidarity to the surface, again we could say, have mostly generated writing that positions solidarity as a corrective and neglected aspect of interpersonal behavior, now advocated as a tool for overcoming the consequences of the current capitalist and liberal representative models of governance. However, this emerging solidarity talk, if we can call it that way, is not without opposition, and there is strong criticism, even within the strain of thought focused on alternative ways of organizing modern communities. Criticism regarding whether better societies can be founded on principles of solidarity. Critics say that solidarity is insufficiently political, relying primarily on instantaneous individual or group reactions and on human emotions instead of on systemic institutional solutions. Or that it is something of a companion to neoliberal policies, for with the implosion of the welfare state and the significant depletion or even outright abandonment of policies designed to help the poor, immigrants, and those less fortunate, direct solidarity among people has emerged to fill institutional gaps. And this is said to be in accordance with neoliberal principles of governance, as it fits the formula do it yourself. And this is why some have highlighted the cooptation of concepts usually thought of as radical or anti-establishment, like active citizenship and direct action, but also solidarity, into mainstream politics. Well, my general contention is that in order to fully explore the political dimension of solidarity, we must first situate the concept in relation to some already established frameworks of thinking about the political community. And here it is within theories and models of citizenship that I want to situate my very limited exploration of the political value of solidarity. And there are a couple of reasons for this. Firstly, if we want to go beyond isolated gestures and actions of solidarity, and if we want to question its general capacities for political reordering, we need to firmly anchor it in broad concepts that capture the ideals and visions of political community, and without a doubt, citizenship is one such concept. Secondly, as I will shortly elaborate in more detail, there is hardly a theory or approach to citizenship that does not presuppose some aspects of solidarity as foundational. Finally, and closely related to the previous point, citizenship and solidarity, although often conceptually intertwined, form a paradoxical duo, reflecting further potential paradoxes that may arise from endeavors to engage solidarity as a political principle. In short, citizenship is a simultaneously inclusive and exclusive notion, incorporating the idea that some sort of boundaries encircles a body of citizens, most often but not exclusively nation-state boundaries, despite the fact that solidarity loses much of its meaning when expected to operate and be exercised within certain imposed limits. And I will return to this point briefly too. Citizenship. Now, citizenship is an indispensable element of every political community. Encompassing dimensions of statuses, rights, and identities, it serves as every polity's legal foundation and social glue. It is intimately linked to the ideas of individual entitlement on the one hand and of attachment to a particular community on the other. Above all, it's a relational concept with three constitutive elements: individual, community, and the relationship between them. Thus, transcending issues of legal and formal statuses and rights and obligations, citizenship is pertinent to wider social questions of who belongs, who ought to belong, under which rules, who is left out and why, what types of relationships co-citizens form, what kinds of relationships exist between citizens and the state, and the nature of relations between citizens and non-citizens. These relationships are not only the result of policies and constitutional settings, but to a large extent are shaped, directed, and mediated by public discourse and widely shared narratives in which the motive of solidarity plays an important role. So, for instance, just to give you this idea of how different models of citizenship use the idea of solidarity. Solidarity with co-ethnics or with co-nationals under the same state institutions helped underpin national citizenship in its modern inceptions. Social citizenship, like rights to education, health, and social protection, implemented through an institutional distribution of national wealth, is built on ideas of egalitarianism and solidarity with less fortunate co-citizens. Multicultural citizenship, on the other hand, in its quest for the recognition of differences, accentuates solidarity within ethnic and religious groups, and so on. So solidarity as a discursive trope can be found in different narratives and interpretative frameworks to purport different ideas and ideals of citizenship, as the latter remains conceptually heavily indebted to the former. However, solidarity's role is often only presupposed or taken for granted and rarely thematized as a consistent feature of interpersonal relations that demands its systematic place in citizenship. The two basic models, or as Pocock termed them, the generative ideals of citizenship, republican and liberal, both developed in ancient Greece and Rome, envisioned strong communal ties that enabled the birth of citizenship, but accentuated other features that had to do more with individuals as citizens than with the relationship between them. The Republican vision of zone politikon valued the citizen as free and agentic, a property-owning male, needless to say, capable of ruling and being ruled, as Aristotle famously put it. The Roman citizen gradually evolved into legalis homo, a man whose rights are acknowledged and protected. Both traditions, liberal and republican, are echoed in today's understanding of citizens as free, right-bearing members of society and agents in their political communities. But what role has solidarity played in the evolution of these ideas? Throughout modern history, citizenship has developed a space for struggle, for inclusion into the political community, and for the protection of rights, which have gradually been seen as inseparable from the essence of what it means to be human. Equality and inclusion have thus become principles propelling the fight to secure and expand citizenship rights. It was social contract theories that posited, albeit in different ways, that the natural state of human beings gathered together in a community mandated that some natural and inalienable rights be recognized. The American and the French revolutions, by way of the United States Constitution and the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, transformed, even if only declaratively, all acknowledged members of the community into equal citizens. Though many remained outside this citizenry, most notably slaves and women, but many others as well, a new ideal of citizenship was set, and a new era in the fight for citizenship rights was ready to begin. Citizenship struggles of the 19th and the 20th centuries, exemplified in movements like abolitionism and the fight for universal suffrage, further accentuated the ideals of equality and solidarity. Abolitionism and the suffrage movement especially relied on principles of solidarity, as they were international movements in which there was an even greater need for transnational ties, mutual recognition and support, and the capacity to put mass pressure on national governments. Solidarity and citizenship grew conceptually closer as a consequence of two historical trends. On one hand, solidary networks built across nation states emerged from the common fight for equal citizenship. On the other hand, those very struggles helped stabilize the notion of national citizenship and the nation state as its container, where solidarity was needed among citizens of a nation and was often strengthened and maintained with the help of nationalist ideologies. In a way, this intranational solidarity worked to undermine international forms of solidarity, especially when the latter threatened to work against the interests of the nation-states themselves. And for instance, this is how Balibar explained the role of the rise of equal citizenship in suppressing the international workers' movement. So I will quote just briefly. "The denial of class identity and the affirmation of national identity go hand in hand. The recognition of universal suffrage is closely coupled with imperialism. The so-called dangerous classes have been allowed access to citizenship only on condition that they transform themselves into constituent parts of the body of the nation and therefore into real or imaginary masters, or more exactly, a form of imperialist domination." So we can already see how solidarity and citizenship, and especially solidarity within citizenship, form a peculiar dynamic. However, the historical experience of two world wars, together with the turbulent interwar period, during which unprecedented waves of migration occurred, with tens of thousands were stripped of their humanity primarily because they were stripped of their citizenship statuses, strengthened the argument for citizenship as the right to have rights, as Hannah Arendt famously put. Then the post-World War II political order of the West and the triumph of the welfare state solidified the role of solidarity in consolidating citizenship. This is particularly highlighted in T.H. Marshall's famous essay on citizenship and the social class, where he outlined the history of citizenship in Great Britain as the history of the struggle between capitalism, which stratifies society, and citizenship rights, which aim to bring equality to all, and concluded with an optimistic look at the then-present epoch in which social citizenship, equal access to healthcare, education, and other social services, had allegedly transformed the whole population of post-war Britain into one class of citizens. Solidarity in citizenship, thus, in our recent history, has mostly meant the acceptance of new social contracts by which some portion of accumulated wealth is distributed, mostly through taxation, in such a way as to accommodate the ideal of an equal citizenry. However, as we know, this social contract has been challenged for quite some time, as has the idea of a universal citizenship, exemplified in Marshall's essay. These challenges, along with attempts at reframing citizenship, which I will outline briefly now, have given new meaning to citizenship solidarity as well. New social movements, coupled with the rise in identity politics from the 1960s onward, destabilized universal citizenship and its ideals of equal political and social rights. Culture and identities became new sites of struggle, as the claim that the so-called universal citizen actually has gender, ethnicity, and religion, namely that he or she is not universal at all. They grew stronger. This questioning of former legal equality, said to mask unrecognized inequalities, transformed the dominant understanding of the political within citizenship and gave rise to new calls for solidarity among minorities and repressed groups. An overall cultural turn and increasing prominence of politics of recognition reframed the struggle for citizenship rights, most notably with advocacies for different rights for differently disadvantaged groups through new normative models such as group differentiated citizenship and multicultural citizenship. And this opened up new debates on the place and role of solidarity as a cohesive force in citizenship. Whereas proponents of different variants of multicultural citizenship insist on the need for solidarity with those who feel excluded and marginalized. Solidarity that presumes acceptance of special rights, exemption from certain laws, and cultural sensitivity in public domains and discourses, all elements of multiculturalism. Critics point to the ghettoization of citizens and the consequent loss of solidarity bonds with the wider citizenry. This shift from old to new notions of citizenship solidarity, therefore, was a result of the shift from redistribution to recognition. Indeed, although Kimlicka, for instance, insisted that the fight for different sets of rights, social or cultural, cannot be seen as a zero-sum game, it is hard not to notice the decoupling of cultural issues from socio-economic ones that coincides with the rise of politics of identities and the relative eclipse of social politics by cultural politics, as many have noticed, like Anne Phillips, Nancy Fraser, and many, many others. Besides these shifts within the paradigm of citizenship rights and entitlements, a reconceptualization of citizenship has also occurred vis-à-vis processes of globalization. The flourishing of concepts like cosmopolitan citizenship, post-national citizenship, denational citizenship, etc., indicate that modern conditions of accelerated globalization impact our way of thinking about the place and role of individual citizens in a world that is no longer dominated exclusively by nation-states, but also by global interests, international institutions and politics, and ever-growing flows of people and capital. Here I want to single out two concepts of citizenship that rely on such insights and demand the appropriate regulation of citizens' rights and duties to accommodate emerging global conditions. One is ecological citizenship, advocated by Andrew Dobson, for example, which stresses the need for the just distribution of ecological space and suggests new international political legal regulations based on ecological footprints, where those with greater footprints would be legally accountable to those whose access to natural resources is limited or endangered. So as Andrew Dobson argues, we need to think of these regulations in terms of citizenship, since access to shared ecological space concerns us all as citizens and should therefore be regulated as a political issue. Even though citizens around the world participate in a single ecological community, access to and use of ecological resources is not equal, and the distribution of those resources is not just. Therefore, the regulations of ecological citizenship would impose obligations and reparation measures on those with a larger ecological impact. Another example of a global citizenship model, again with a stronger focus on obligations than on rights, is the proposition of Engin and Brian Turner for a global system of taxation on different kinds of transnational mobilities, which would create an international fund to alleviate the consequences of global catastrophes and at the same time strengthen the mutual rights and duties of all citizens in the world. And they say, and I'll quote now, "If people started, albeit in a modest way, to pay for their rights and to contribute through taxation to the common good at a global level, human rights would become a more tangible part of everyday life. The ordinary man and woman would feel involved in global projects to prevent famine and drought, and they would begin acting as cosmopolitan citizens. Without the cosmopolitan taxation system, the UN will continue to largely depend on US funding and generosity, both of which have been declining anyway. Without these changes, human rights would be subject to the criticism that they are fake rights because they do not correspond to duties." Now, this overview of various conjunctions between citizenship and solidarity treats the latter in an unusual way, given that one of its most common features, namely internationalism, is not thematized. This is due to the unique role solidarity plays in strengthening the sense of membership and belonging within citizenship. Bearing that in mind, and even though solidarity figures as a necessary rhetorical tool for different variants of citizenship, national, welfare, multicultural, global citizenship, etc., we could perhaps assert that it is in fact incommensurable with the notion of citizenship. Citizenship functions simultaneously as an inclusionary and exclusionary concept because it in itself embodies legalized discrimination, since it presupposes a legitimate distinction between citizens and non-citizens. The exception to this is found in the last two examples of ecological citizenship and cosmopolitan citizenship, but it must be stressed that they represent only theoretical models and that they face strong criticism, together with other models of so-called alternative or hyphenated citizenships, by scholars who insist that the concept of citizenship only functions within real existing political communities and is operative only when it indicates state membership. Can solidarity then play any constitutive role in building social and political relations if boundaries defining who is included are set in advance? Or should we presume that citizenship can indeed be applicable to global transnational contexts? Now I will focus on some of the defining features of solidarity itself, and will then return to the question of its relationship with citizenship. To be able to deal further with the questions raised above, we need to define what types of relationships could be said to take the form of solidarity. First, we must differentiate between solidarity and other forms of empathic behavior. Discussing the differences between pity, compassion, and solidarity in her book on revolution, Hannah Arendt remarks, "It is out of pity that men are attracted toward les hommes faibles, but it is out of solidarity that they establish deliberately and, as it were, dispassionately a community of interest with the oppressed and exploited. For solidarity, because it partakes of reason and hence of generality, is able to comprehend a multitude conceptually, not only the multitude of a class or a nation or a people, but eventually all mankind. Terminologically speaking, solidarity is a principle that can inspire and guide action, compassion is one of the passions, and pity is a sentiment." End of quote. It is not only the nature of affection that that sets solidarity apart from other empathic impulses. It is also, I would argue, the nature of the relationships it builds. So let me consider further how solidarity differs from charity. One of the defining traits of solidarity, I would argue, is an implicit leveling that occurs between the parties involved. And this is where the difference between charity and solidarity resides, in the principle of equality. Charity does not imply a critique of existing hierarchies, it merely prescribes the desirable moral conduct for those on top of the social and economic ladder. Solidarity, on the other hand, emerges from situations in which people recognize each other as equal and thus entitled to the same rights and living conditions. We act in solidarity when we want to alleviate some sort of injustice or respond to its consequences, whether man or nature-made. Hence, the social values underlying solidarity are equality and justice mutually intertwined, as the just order is seen in this respect as the order of equality. I would also contend that solidarity is defined as an act or a condition for acting when we simultaneously give something and give up on something. So again, leveling occurs. To be in solidarity with thus implies the sharing of a position or experience with those who need or seek solidarity and the partaking in their situation. This also means that acts of solidarity do not necessarily have to be acts at all in the sense of agency. Sometimes it is with inaction, with a refusal to act, or with self-censorship that we show our solidarity. Solidarity thus imposes limits on our individual agency and to individualism in general, stressing the higher importance of a group cause or principle we share with others. In other words, some sort of communalism is always implied in solidarity. Now, returning to the question of citizenship and keeping in mind its particular historical and political meanings, its different frameworks and the various interpretations of the internal force of citizen solidarity, we can ask again, within citizenship, where do potentials for engaging solidarity exist? Since citizenship is still predominantly a state-bound concept, let me begin with this traditional understanding of it, involving constitutional protections of statuses and rights and established norms for relations among members. State citizenship has an almost asymptotic relationship with equality, striving to attain it as a proper constitutive ideal, but constantly reproducing internal hierarchies and classes of not so equal citizens. Solidarity thus produces tensions with citizenship, not only regarding the exclusionary nature of the latter, but also in a narrower sense regarding failures to accommodate the equality of the statuses, rights, and identities of all citizens. In this respect, solidarity could hardly be expected to perform as anything more than a corrective or as a warning of the need for more inclusive communal citizenship in which identities are not entrenched but work towards stabilizing a shared political identity. The welfare state's model of social citizenship is, in my mind, however pessimistic this may seem, the pinnacle of institutional solidarity within the modern nation state, with systems of taxation that rely on intergenerational, interregional, and social and economic solidarity. The biggest threats to this model are current austerity measures and politically manipulated narratives of changing ethnic and cultural balances. Here we should consider the dangers of what Richard Sennett called the destructive solidarity of us against them. And I'm quoting now, "The perverse power of solidarity in its us against them form remains alive in the civil societies of liberal democracies as in European attitudes toward ethnic immigrants who seem to threaten social solidarity or in American demands for a return to family values." End of quote. These threats need to be challenged and opposed from the position that social solidarity is essential for building just and equal citizenship communities. In that sense, Rorty was right to point out that feelings of solidarity are necessarily a matter of which similarities and dissimilarities strike us as salient, and that such salience is a function of historically contingent final vocabulary. We should create a more expansive sense of solidarity than we presently have, and we should take into account those we instinctively think of as they rather than us. However, I want to underline that solidarity within this frame of state-bound citizenship inevitably remains thin and expected to work inside state boundaries, and is thus susceptible to a loss of its argumentative power when confronted with the dangers presented as external. International solidarity, on the other hand, of the kind scholars and activists predominantly have in mind when exploring and engaging the concept, expresses the ideals of equality and justice more purely in a broader political space that transcends nation-states and encompasses the whole of humanity. Instances of international solidarity can indeed be political in that they are capable of forming institutional relationships and challenging power relations as well as creating new ones. But this comes with significant limitations, especially related to the durability of such endeavors, which usually do not produce lasting political formations, let alone political communities, and due to the fact that they do not significantly challenge state institutions, which remain the primary locus of political power managing our statuses, mobility, and fundamental rights. Finally, models of international global citizenship, which I mentioned earlier, despite the criticism they receive for overstretching the concept of citizenship, are important to bear in mind when thinking about the prospects for linking solidarity and citizenship. These models rely on a vocabulary of rights, obligations, and durable institutions, and take into account the global condition of citizens' universal rights, thus embarking on an attempt to define, however loosely, the global community of citizens. Ian Turner's thoughts on cosmopolitan citizenship, for example, resonate particularly loudly right now as the world faces one of the biggest refugee crises in recent history. For when we travel or move abroad, we move from one citizenship regime to another, retaining some of the entitlements from the previous regime and expecting protection from the one in which we are entering. Or at least this is what some of us expect and receive. We take these rights to mobility and protection of our interests for granted as established freedoms once some time ago. However, at this very moment, we are witnessing constraints on the freedom of movement, the protection of human rights, and the right to seek asylum. In debates about the refugee crisis in Europe, the cost of accommodating refugees is often raised and is used by many member countries as a pretext for not dealing with the issue. And though it is clearly not the only contestable question, the recent deal between the EU and Turkey from March 2016 did reveal that accommodating a great influx of population comes with a price tag. So the agreement includes the allocation of 3 billion euros from the EU to Turkey. If we could reach a global consensus that human destinies should never be made subject to budgetary negotiations, would it not make sense to develop an international system of taxation of the global mobility of both people and capital that could transform the privilege enjoyed by some into an assistance fund for others? This would incorporate both elements of citizenship and solidarity. And yet this model has its limits as well, for it does not include partaking in shared experiences, and it supports equality and justice in a very restricted manner. Therefore, this is another variant of a thin form of solidarity, devoid from direct involvement and bottom-up action. So to conclude, with no current plausible linkage between thick solidarity and citizenship, the relationship between these two mutually related concepts remains open, but is nevertheless crucial for further thinking about the politically transformative potential of solidarity. Citizenship's essential ideal of equality must be formulated in such a way that it does not create tensions between unity and inclusion, where unity justifies exclusionary measures and inclusion of diversity is said to weaken unity. And solidarity's appealing force should not too readily be attributed to its presupposed universal character. Solidarity is instead a process in which joint effort and work is a necessity that does not rely on any universal presumption, but is itself a universalizing political relation, to quote David Featherstone, rooted in concepts of rights, status, and the sense of shared membership, epitomized best in the notion of citizenship. Thank you.